Many thanks for participating to our webinar today. I'm Josef Doppelbauer, the Executive Director of the European Union Agency for Railways. As you have heard from Idris' presentation, rail can have a significant contribution to carbon neutrality, and therefore I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion with you.
Idris, please introduce yourself.
Yes, hello to everybody. I'm Idris Pagan. I coordinated the work on the report we produced on this fostering the railway contribution to the European Green Deal objectives. And this was quite an intense work. We have shared with a lot of colleagues in different internally and with different organizations. And I hope we'll have a fruitful discussion. We have done this presentation together with Sarah, who will now introduce herself.
Thank you, Idris. Good morning, everyone. I'm Sara Bizzotto, and I joined the agency in January this year, and I'm currently working in the Communication Executive Unit. I think we really need a change of paradigm to trigger a substantial shift to rail and make it the favored transport mode by the new generation. I hope you enjoyed our presentation, and we will now start with our Q&A session.
Thank you, Sarah. And I start off with one question to Joseph. What did we learn from the COVID-19 crisis with regards to the Green Deal?
Well, Max, COVID-19 has impacted the daily lives of all of us. And of course, it has also heavily impacted the transport sector. As Idris mentioned, what we could see at the peak of the crisis was a heavy reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, with first estimates that half of the reduction is coming from the transport sector. And as Karima Delli has reminded us, transport is a large contributor of greenhouse gases, about 25% in the European Union, and apart from the rail sector, has increased its emission over the last 20 years. So the lesson learned from COVID is we need to reinforce the modal shift to rail for both passenger and freight services.
Thank you, Joseph. And talking about freight, Idris, I have one question for you. When reading through the paper, we hear a lot of talk about passenger transport, but what about freight?
Freight is definitely not forgotten, as already mentioned by Ms. Delli. The creation of the Rail Freight Coalition, which was co-signed by our director in late May, was calling for actions to reach a rail freight modal share of 30% by 2030. However, our report was mainly focusing on passenger because it will serve as a contribution to the sustainable and smart mobility strategy of the Commission, which is obviously more passenger oriented. By the way, there is a public consultation which started on the roadmap for this strategy on the 1st of July. So I invite all active listeners to contribute to this public consultation. But we definitely are not forgetting the freight. We will be working also on actions for freight in the second half of this year, because we would like also to develop another contribution, which will be more freight oriented, to the future measures to increase and better manage railway capacities that the Commission is willing to develop in the first half of 2021. So this will be another opportunity to exchange and to develop some ideas.
Thank you, Idris. From a broader perspective to a very particular set of the railway system, Andreas Holthaus wants to know what efforts are there to promote solutions that reduce the use of concrete sleepers, which in their production cause high CO2 impact. Can any of you say something on this?
Well, Max, I have read with interest this question. This is an aspect that we have not yet studied, but we will look into this and we will come back to Mr. Holthaus when we have more clarity.
Great. Yeah, that was very specific. So a more broader question, the European, by Maria da Luz Antonio from Portugal, European Commission does have in view any legislative initiative envisaging tariff policies in order to promote the modal shift. Idris, do you know of any initiative at Commission level?
Yes, this I think I can answer. In the Green Deal, it's pretty clear that the subsidy to fossil fuel will end, including tax exemptions in the civil aviation and maritime sector, so that the price of the transport will reflect the impact it has on the environment. So this is really a key element also of the Green Deal. You have also the emission trading scheme that will probably be extended to the maritime sector. There is, for the moment, only launch discussions on the extension also of this emission trading scheme to the road sector. And there is also the strong subsidy to the EU battery industry as an alternative transport fuel. So there are some elements already contained to reduce this the external costs of different modes of transport. We also discussed the exemption of the kerosene taxation and some tolling for the road sector, like we have, for instance, in Switzerland. So definitely there are some discussions going on.
Yeah, very interesting. We have here a question on the methodology of calculating external costs. Sandeep Rein, I hope I say that right, from UNESCAP, wants to know how have the external costs of 987 billion quantified? Do you have any methodology we can use for the Asia Pacific region? Do you have any info on this, Idris?
I think I will not extend myself on the methodology, but I think we could give the correct reference to the listener, to the participant of this webinar. This is coming from a study of the Commission, which was also made with Delft University. So I think we can provide some elements of methodology to the participant by providing the link, but it will be very long to explain the full methodology.
That's a good workaround. Let's delve into a very hot debate. Battery electric vehicles are a good move in the right direction, provided that the source of components for the battery is ethically obtained and the batteries are disposed of in an environmentally sensitive manner. What are the thoughts of the panel on this potential dichotomy?
I think here we are actually making clear that there is this dichotomy. There was a study, a very long study from the European Environmental Agency, with whom we have been in touch quite heavily. And the basic conclusion of this study was that in the end, the battery electrical vehicles are more sustainable than the fossil fuel. But there are some elements that must be taken into consideration, and one is to have ethical origin of the elements that are composing the battery, and the second is indeed to have a kind of circular economy for the battery, and this is not yet happening, so this has to be developed in the next years. But in general, battery electrical vehicles, as Sarah mentioned in our part of the presentation, is a solution, but it's not the solution. It has to be taken in a more global multimodal approach.
Thank you. Valentin Ambros of Fermet wants to know measures to apply to the railway that will permit to increase the share of goods transported to 30% by 2030 must be clearly specified and chosen according technical and socioeconomic criteria, not political. Fermet is doing a traffic study in the 10T corridors, rail, road and barge, with projections to 2025 and 2030 that will show the critical points in the net, density of traffic, bottlenecks and so on. It must be taken into consideration. Idris, do we agree?
Well, perhaps I respond to that. analysis made by FairMed is clearly helping in assessing the necessary measures, because it will highlight the bottlenecks that prevent rail from taking up a higher modal share. And also, as mentioned in our presentation, a clear responsibility for managing cross-border transport needs to be established, and that should also help in eliminating the bottlenecks that in the end, we need to make some very positive moves to promote the modal shift in order to reach the 30%.
Thank you very much, Joseph. And maybe one more that you could take is, do we anticipate a concrete target share for railway in the upcoming strategy on mobility, or a concrete target regarding decarbonization in the railway sector itself?
Well, that is something for the Commission to decide. As Idris has mentioned, we are currently in the public consultation phase for this strategy on sustainable and smart mobility. And it might be that in the end, this strategy will contain such targets.
Very good. Wolfgang Reinbrecht asks, which is the planned nominal average speed of the future freight and passenger transport to be attractive in competition to air transport? I think we can say something on this, Joseph.
Well, we have based our studies on the assumptions that you could connect cities that are 800 kilometers apart within 4 hours, because 4 hours is a time that is also usually accepted even by business travelers, and 800 kilometers in 4 hours gives you then 200 kilometers per hour average speed. On freight, the situation is a bit more complicated, because I believe the end-to-end transport time is largely determined by waiting times at borders, and this is the angle of attack that we need to tackle for freight.
Okay. Are there any concrete steps planned for the introduction of the Eurocontrol for rail? Should it be more of a coordinating body, or should it take over responsibilities from the national infrastructure managers? Konstantin Mehrmann wants to know.
Well, we have concluded from past experience, but also from looking at the situation with cross-border transport and even the missing links, that it could be highly beneficial to have a supranational body in charge of capacity planning, capacity allocation, and also for emergency situation, like we had a couple of years ago in Rastatt in Germany. So we are at the initial stage of bringing this aspect on the table, and this needs to be followed up with more concrete steps.
Yeah. Kevin Smith from the International Railway Journal. Hi, Kevin. How do we make rail journeys cost competitive with other higher polluting modes?
Well, the answer here is twofold. The price is always a factor that is determined on the one hand from the market potential, and if we open up higher market potential by connecting the major cities, by connecting the major airports, then we create a bigger market for rail. But price is also determined by the cost of the service, and here we have to take out costs drastically. One major cost driver in Europe for rail is the technical and regulatory fragmentation, for which I believe we have already made some very good progress in the last couple of years. Since 2016, for instance, we have been able to reduce the national technical rules for vehicle authorization from 14,300 to currently 950. And also since 16th of June 2019, the European Union Agency for Railways is authorizing entity. also taking out cost from a key process, vehicle authorization. So creating higher market potential and reducing cost of production will contribute to better and more attractive pricing of rail services.
Yeah. So we are leveling the playing field in terms of cost. What about alternative fuels? Question from Miroslav Haltov. Do you think that hydrogen will be the most useful alternative fuel solution for rail instead of electrification of lines with low traffic density?
Well, I can start with a general answer and then Idris might complement. We know that there are already some quite successful trials of hydrogen trains, in particular in Germany, but now also tested in some other countries like the Netherlands and France. And I believe that rail and hydrogen could be a good combination, good synergy. But still, I believe for those lines that are already electrified, this is the preferable solution. Idris.
Yes, indeed. And I would simply add that there was last week a Clean Hydrogen Alliance that have been set up by the European Commission, and that there is some strong impetus by the European Union to foster this energy. But indeed, as Joseph mentioned, it will be for the railway sector to substitute some low density line which are not electrified. In the avoid, shift, improve, this will be clearly in the improve element of the environmental policy. So yeah, it has a potential, but probably for low density line which are not electrified.
Okay, thank you. Question from Jonathan Brown, Ricardo UK. I noticed a comment earlier on challenges with support the rail industry modal shift working within the EU rule on fair competition, in this case between transport modes. There is no fair way to provide equal support to, for example, road and rail, as the cost bases are so different with many different hidden and non-direct costs. We all understand that rail will need additional funding support to achieve a level playing field with rail. Is there a risk that this will get derailed by a very aggressive road transport lobby? Joseph or Idris?
Perhaps I take it up, and I would like to first refer back to this study on the external costs, because that study explains some of the factors that contribute to this imbalance between the transport modes. But indeed, there is always the influence of lobby groups, and we need to admit that some industrial sectors, also driven by the high economic power and the number of jobs involved, these sectors have a strong lobby power. But the answer is we need to lobby strongly for rail in order to balance these efforts.
Yeah. Thank you. And night trains, we talk about them in the paper. Alexander Desbezieux from Rail Co-op says night trains are a priority within EU, but we see in France, for instance, that there is no appropriate material coaches homologated. What kind of incentive from the EU to overcome this kind of barrier?
That's one of the elements we praised in our report. We believe there are two key elements that should be triggered in order to revitalize this night trains, for which we believe, and there is political support, we believe there is a real potential. First of all, it's differentiated track access charges for this segment of the market, which can be considered a niche, and also to help the operators in either refurbishing or to buying this new rolling stock, because that's one of the key cost element, as Joseph was saying, for the night trains. The rolling up of the night trains is less intense than regular frequent train, so the incomes are less obvious. So indeed, the main cost is really to refurbish and to buy the train. So there should be a clear support towards this policy, and this is one of the elements we clearly identified as potential to revitalize the night trains.
Mm-hmm. Linde Yehi from the Dutch Council for the Environment and Infrastructure asked, what can we learn from rail freight corridors in regards to passenger transport, if anything?
Well, the answer is simple. As I mentioned before, one of the blocking factors for rail across borders is that firstly, all the incumbent operators normally think in terms of their national service first. So the usual answer when we talk to any major railway undertaking is 95% of our traffic is domestic. And corridors are an approach to overcome this narrow focus, to think in larger dimensions, to think European-wide, and to also tackle the concrete cross-border issues. So corridors is one step towards a pan-European network of truly European rail connections for passengers.
Okay, an interesting question about the usage of electricity. We got for those trains who are running on electricity, we don't always know the source of the electricity, whether it is green or not. It's a question from Francisco Rosa. And how is this addressed in the scope of the Green Deal?
This is one of the elements we wanted to study, and this is quite complicated to find the source of the electricity production to run the railway. Obviously, if you take France, most of the electricity will come from nuclear, and depending on the energy mix of the country, it will influence the way the electricity production is and usage for the railway. But we couldn't find any elements that could give a proportion of the different energy production and consumption by the railway. I am not sure it is in the preparation of the future study. This I cannot answer, but this is an extremely good question.
Would you consider nuclear a green source of energy?
This I will not enter into this debate.
Idris is French, so
fair enough.
Has to be careful.
Okay. Another question on rail freight, which is the effort of ERA carrying out to promote rolling highway to pick trucks up, for example, which are the most important challenges for this combined mode in Europe?
Well, rolling highway is one part of what we call the combined transport. So combined freight transport is a mode of transport that uses for a significant part of the distance rail. And there is various types of combined transport: containers, trailers that are loadable, and the rolling motorway. We have in 2018 carried out a study on facilitating combined transport, and there we have identified a number of aspects that need better regulation. And even last year, 2019, we had some joint activities with UIRR, the European organization supporting combined transport, and we are continuing those activities. Combined transport is clearly one essential contributor to bringing more freight on rail.
Thank you, Joseph. Just wanted to direct your attention on two links that were received in the chat. One is from Justus Hartkamp from ProRail. They confirm with research that a shift from air to rail can save up to 8 million tons CO2 on a yearly basis. Thank you very much for this, Justus. And our colleague from DG Move, Michaela Strohschneider, published a link to the EU Sustainable Transport Taxation. So anybody interested in that can refer to those links. I move on to the next question. This one is coming from Tristan Chevrolet from Switzerland. A key advantage of rail appears to be railway assets' long life expectancy. However, this long life is linked with very high procuration cost. Will the European Commission provide some form of assistance in drawing up specifications for the procurement of new rolling stock? Joseph.
Well, perhaps one aspect here is again the fragmentation. The high cost of rolling stock historically have always come from the fact that there have been different requirements and different specifications in each member state, which then bring with it that the volumes of the fleet are pretty low. I used to give an example comparing rail to aviation. In aviation, let's speak of the mid-distance intra-Europe aviation. You have basically two types of aircraft. You have the Airbus, normally 320 in that category, and you have the Boeing 737. Boeing 737 has about 7,000 aircraft of the same type. If you look into rail, 100 is already a very large series. In France, for instance, we have 700, about 700 TGVs, but these are of 6 different types. So one contribution that we can make is truly standardized European vehicles based on larger series, which could then be more cost effective, and we could additionally benefit from the longer lifetime of these assets. The new role of the agency to provide European authorization could be also very helpful to reuse vehicles if they are no longer needed in one country in another country.
That would help the sector a lot, I think. Another question where the agency could play a role is on multimodality. To boost multimodality and shift to rail, it will imply new synergies and coordination regarding technical specifications, so digitalization aspects, for instance, and the regulatory aspects among the different modes of transport. Is there a strategy of the agency regarding the coordination of road and air? A question from Bardo Schettini. Joseph, are we doing something in that direction?
Well, the strategy is twofold. In the short term, we need to work towards a fast and efficient digitalization of railway services. And the digital aspect, of course, needs to consider the requirements from multimodality. I believe in the midterm, it could be an interesting thought to have one agency in charge of all land transport aspects, because that seems to be the most efficient way to achieve this coordination across modal boundaries.
Thank you. We're switching back and forth between topics, but I think this is in the nature of the overall theme. A question by Eli A. Is it still beneficial to switch from cars and trucks to trains when the operating energy comes from fossil fuels? Does it depend on the filling rate of the trains, Idris?
Idris has acoustically not understood the question, but if I try to answer globally, the big advantage of rail is that it is a shared mode of transport. Take one lorry, with one lorry about 35 meters or 40 meters long, you can carry a certain amount of freight, but a train in Europe can be 740 meters long and can carry several thousands tons of freight with a much lower energy consumption per ton or per ton kilometer. So even if the electricity comes from a not green source, the fact that rail consumes less of this energy is still advantageous.
Yeah. We have a question on the measure of transport CO2. A useful indicator to measure transport CO2 intensity is the European Environmental Agency's Term 27 indicator. This covers all modes, but unfortunately long time under review. It will be great to have this indicator updated for guiding passengers and shippers. This goes in the direction of developing a transport service eco-label. This should be the task for the European Commission. Would we appreciate that?
I can only say that I think at the moment the European Environmental Agency is working on a report by, I think it should be released this year, on the comparison between air and rail. And from what I know, they are working also on the calculation of CO2 emissions. So there might be some update this year, but the question is more to the European Environment Agency rather than us.
Right. Then let's switch back to multimodality. In the multimodal approach, question from Serge Drogmand, the IRG chairman. How to balance priorities on investment and constraints between the different modes? Is it conceivable to implement in member states a principle of multimodal financing, where revenue for one mode can be invested in another mode in a sustainable way?
Here I give my personal view, and I think we need always, and this holds both for passenger and freight, to consider the end-to-end transport. And multimodality is, in particular for freight, practically unavoidable. So therefore, it also needs to be considered in the funding policy to have efficient end-to-end connections which consider the most environmentally friendly transport mode as the backbone, meaning rail. So yes, one should adjust the funding with the ecological and environment priorities.
Yeah, the race is tough between the modes. Timon Heinrizi from Rail Business and DVZ in Germany asks, do you expect rail to lose its advantage in terms of environmental protection? Hyundai is about to introduce tractors with hydrogen technology to Switzerland that have an operating range of 1,000 kilometers. Do you expect this development to jeopardize rail subsidies that are granted to avoid climate change?
Yes, Timon is right. This is indeed a development that will take away some of the arguments, but all in all, as I mentioned before, there is still the fact, and the fact is undeniable, that rail has a much lower energy consumption per ton kilometer and person kilometer. Rail has a much lower need of space, a much lower disturbance of the environment, because you can, in one stretch that is a couple of meters broad, you can transport a lot of goods, whereas for even hydrogen trucks or battery trucks with long range, you need motorways, you suffer from congestion as shown in our presentation. So yes, it is competition, but I think again we need to promote the advantages of rail.
Right. We have an answer on the question on procurement. As we are reaching almost the end of this webinar, I want to just draw your attention. Our colleague here, Fitch from DG Move, says, on guidelines for procurement, note that EU regulations promote MEAT, meet most economically advantaged tender principle. This is intended to promote life cycle cost analysis. The industry car bodies, CER, UNIF and EAM are working on detailed guides on this, yeah, and encouraged by the Commission. I think we have just time for one more question. Don't you think that the sector will be able to innovate together with the EU without technological regulations in need of an imposed Eurocontrol, of instead the regulatory aspects is set on a higher and more courage level, like making compulsory on long journey with goats and lorries, etc.? Joseph, I will cut it short here because it's very detailed, but what is our role in the regulatory way in this game?
Well, our role is very simple. We are predominantly in charge of interoperability, meaning creating a single European railway area with no technical and no operational barriers. And we also have a second major role, which is railway safety, which has not been much at the center of today's discussion, but should not be forgotten that rail is also the safest mode of surface transport. And this is another factor that we need to consider in the overall equation when comparing modes of transport. Max, if I may, I just would like to mention that as we have indicated before, this webinar today can also be seen as a contribution to stipulate and stimulate the discussion on the public consultation for the sustainable and smart mobility strategy. This public consultation is still open until the 23rd of September, and we can also provide you with the link from the Commission so that you can have easy access to that.
Thank you very much, Joseph. I think with this we have to come to an end. I want to invite Idris and Sarah to say a final word, maybe, then switch back to Joseph, and then I have one final announcement. Idris?
It was a very interesting webinar for us and a very intense work, and we hope you enjoyed our presentation and the discussions we had. Also, it wasn't live. It would have been probably more more interesting in live, but it's also a nice experience, this kind of webinar. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Sarah, you have something to add?
Just want to thank you everyone for participating in this webinar, and I really hope you find it interesting and you enjoy it.
Thank you. Joseph?
Well, like my colleagues, I need to thank everyone for participating to our webinar on sustainable transport. And I have the feeling we could have continued this discussion for at least 1 or 2 more hours. That just shows how important this topic is. And I thank all the speakers, the technical support team of the agency, and all the attendees and all the contributors. It was a great event, and thank you very much again. Back to you, Max, for the final announcement.
The final announcement is that we will continue our webinar series on the 16th of September from 10 to 11, same time. We are preparing a webinar on a compelling vision for the target railway system from 3 perspectives. If you want not to miss the invitation to this webinar, please register in the top header or bottom footer of our website in My ERA profile. Then you will not miss any invitation email. With this, I thank all the speakers and participants for a very interesting webinar, and I wish you a very good and safe holidays, maybe by train. Thank you very much.